Hi there, my name is Sabrina Crespin, and today we're going to be discussing Anne Hutchinson and the Antinomian Controversy. First let's start with kind of an overview of who the Puritans were. That's a term that we learn about a lot in history class, especially colonial history, but just a basic outline. They were a group of English Protestants in this time, 16th and 17th centuries, who wanted to purify the Church of England. They did not like what was happening to the Church of England. They were starting to implement traditions that were native to the Catholic Church, and so a lot of these Puritans disliked that. They thought it detracted from their focus of doctrine and scripture. So they started to come to the New World after facing persecution in England, and they ended up settling in the Massachusetts Bay Colony led by John Winthrop. And he was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they set up theocratic local governments. Only church members could vote or run for office, and they regularly cast out people of different faiths from them. You can see here on this map where they settled. This is the New England colonies, specifically the Massachusetts Bay colonies where they really originated. So Anne Hutchinson was a Puritan. She was born in England and then emigrated with her husband William to Boston in 1633. And the reason she actually emigrated is going to become important in the story in just a moment, but she followed her minister, John Cotton, who she really enjoyed his preaching. He taught very differently than some of the other Puritan ministers, and she really felt called by his preaching and decided to go over there with him. She actually served as a midwife, and so a lot of what she advised her clients on was not just parenting or childbirth, but spiritual matters as well. The big thing that she believed in was this idea that covenant theology in the Puritan church was misguided. She believed in what's called covenant of grace theology. The Puritan church preached a covenant of works theology, which basically, in very basic terms, says that if someone is saved, they will act in a moral way. The fruit of the Spirit, if you've ever heard of that. Covenant of grace theology says that morality is not inherently salvation worthy. Salvation is not hinged on your works or not. And so that Jesus Christ determines salvation for people. And Hutchinson very much believed in covenant of grace, but that flew in the face of a lot of Puritan teachings at the time. So she started doing these home Bible studies. She started out discussing these theological views with just those people who were her clients, who she helped as a midwife, and it grew quickly. And so she started hosting like 60 or more people per week. She had to start organizing meetings for men as well as women. And so she really taught that an intuition of the Spirit would lead to one's election and sanctification by God, and not good works, and that one's outward behavior was not tied to the state of one's soul, which was really attractive to people who had moved to the Massachusetts Bay Colony for reasons other than religion, like their professions. And that being said, though, the theocracy, the colonial leadership very much disapproved of this. And so they said that these unauthorized religious groups and meetings would confuse the faithful, is what they said. And that Hutchinson actually quoted the Bible back to them and said, quoting from Titus, that the elder women should instruct the younger. They were not fans, of course, of women leading. And so Hutchinson continued, even with Winthrop warning against teaching covenant of grace theology. She continued to do so. Her minister backed her up on this, and this started what's called the Antinomian Controversy. Antinomian, anti means not, against, and then nomian means law or rule. And so antinomian means against the rules or rebellious. And so several private conferences and meetings started to get held, and the schism really started separating the church between covenant of grace and covenant of works theology. And Hutchinson was a big part of this. And so what ended up happening was that a trial for dissenters had to happen. So John Winthrop brought charges against Mrs. Hutchinson and basically said that she was committing heresy, that she was confusing the faithful, and he served as judge and prosecutor. And so she was very honest in her trial, and after 2 days she was found guilty of heresy and banished. And so she ended up being banished outside of the colony. And what's interesting, which will become interesting in just a moment, is that the court actually did not have anything to say about Hutchinson's gender in this situation. And that will become important in just a moment when we discuss that. But the verdict basically said that she would be banished for not being a woman fit for society. And so she then had a church trial, which again, not a lot of separation of church and state there, and the church excommunicated her from the church, as well as her husband and her children. They ended up settling with Roger Williams in Rhode Island, specifically Providence, and then New Amsterdam. So, New Netherland. And so this is important, not just because of the historical facts and what days she did things, but she's famous not so much for her actions, so much as what she became a symbol of and her inspiration to people. And so she almost became this Platonic ideal of this challenge to the system, this rebellious woman, and so later on, she kind of became this like martyr and crusader for religious liberty. And then even later on in the early 1900s, she became a symbol for women's suffrage, fighting the patriarchy. And that's interesting because that really was never her purpose. She never tried to fight the patriarchy. That was not her goal. She was preaching theocracy. Theology. She was explaining her spiritual beliefs. And the Puritans actually made it very clear that their reasonings with their issues with Hutchinson were purely theological, had nothing to do with her gender, but people took her story and really ran with it and really were inspired by this larger than life symbol of dissent, of rebellion, of fighting the man, and kind of became this symbol of the separation of church and state and feminism and this terror to the patriarchy that so many women wanted to be, and they looked to her as a symbol for that, even if that was not her original intent. And so her inspiration really is why she's important in history, and she became a symbol that others then looked to fight for separation of church and state, for women's suffrage, for religious liberty, for First Amendment rights. So that's a lot of why she matters and where this falls into history. And so a quote, I really liked this quote from her: "But now having seen him which is invisible, I fear not what man can do unto me." This is my bibliography. There we go. And I used 5 different sources, 2 books that I actually used in my job writing lesson plans, and then a couple of papers and a map. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I hope you learned something about Anne Hutchinson.